Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Broker Breakdown with myself and James. And today we wanted to kind of touch base on, I think, a few things within our industry and a few topics that are relative to the buyer experience. So as a client, how do things actually unfold behind the scenes? I guess what value do we bring to the table that not all brokerages maybe have? Because there's a lot of differentiating factors within our industry. And also just touch base on that experience on what a typical policy looks like from start to finish and what goes into it, so that you as viewers have a better idea about what we do, maybe some of the value add that we provide throughout that kind of experience from start to finish. And then what things we also do, James, that help with maybe after that, right? So what else we can provide further, or what to expect once that policy started. So there's a bunch of different stuff we want to touch base on today.
Yeah, I think in the world that we live in and how technology is kind of boosted almost every industry, including insurance, a lot of people get the misconception that insurance is literally a click of a button and it's done, it's bound. Like, here's your policy. Now go drive, or go take your keys to your new home. But it's really like there is a process behind it, even if you are going to be buying from those online companies, which, again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But again, there is a process that you may not be aware of that actually goes on behind the scenes and basically after the fact, right? For us, it's a little bit different, just because we don't do all that behind the scenes kind of stuff. We basically get all the information up front. We kind of do our own underwriting, all that kind of stuff. Documents are signed, and then it gets sent off for basically processing at that time. Where, again, there's different models of it, but like, again, going from the online world, most of the time it's really just get the information, it's bound, and then it gets sent off to a company, and then they basically do all this stuff after the fact, which, again, can be a little bit problematic, because if everything's not really disclosed at the time of binding, you could end up having an issue where information was not disclosed or not clarified, and then that can end up actually changing quotes and coverages. So, but yeah, just a lot of things that we kind of want to touch point on from kind of start to finish today. But Mike, how do you really start the whole, like, on your end, how do you start the buying process? Like, if someone, like, let's say I'm calling you right now for a quote, like, kind of what are the first steps that you take as a broker?
Yeah. So, I mean, the actual things that I do, and I think I'm a little bit different than everyone else in one or two aspects, right? I look at myself, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, but I'm more about relationships, my personality, how I can help educate you on certain things you should know about. And my goal through that process is, can we build enough trust together where if I have that opportunity, we're going to be able to work long term, and you're going to want to have that insurance with me for multiple reasons. So typically how I started off is I'm probably just going to ask open-ended questions about, is there concerns, right? Are we talking about price concerns solely, or is there more to it? Is it the service from your previous agent or representative, whoever you have stuff with? Is it the fact that the claims experience wasn't what you were expecting it to? Or maybe even, do you feel that when you signed up a policy with another individual, the actual transaction and the whole process felt too salesy, right? You signed up the policy, all seemed to be good in that first, couple of days or a week, but then that person has no longer been around to touch base with, or, those types of things, James. So, I mean, maybe you can even add in too, but I would say that the way I start it is just asking those open-ended questions to get a better idea. So if I'm asking those and trying to get a better idea on the conversation, what we're doing, and it's always just, what's my price? Give me a quote. It's not going to end up in the place you want it to be, because we're not on the same page on that experience.
Yeah, I kind of do this as a very similar kind of tactic where I kind of ask some questions and kind of feel out the client and what are they actually looking for? Like, what is the purpose of them looking around today? Because some people, oh, my renewal's in a month, I kind of want to shop around. You know, when I'm paying too much, I want to shop around. My broker, agent, or representative, whoever it might be, you know what, has kind of dropped the ball recently, hasn't been getting back to me, isn't servicing me properly. So like I said, I just kind of like to gauge what the conversation is going to be, what their touch points are, and what their reason is for kind of looking around. And then I kind of take it from there, right? Because everyone's different. Every situation is going to be different. Some people want to save money. Some people want the service. Some people want the coverage. There's 1,000 different ways we can kind of move that needle forward a bit. But again, before anything, I definitely kind of gauge the conversation and kind of see, you know what, this is what my clients' touch points are and what they're really worried about. And then, like I said, take the conversation in the direction that they're really worried in. And then, like I said, kind of give them a little bit of ease to that, right? If their biggest point is service, obviously I kind of ease them into what we do here at our brokerage, right? And kind of tell them, you know what, that definitely does not happen. Again, our CSRs are some of the best CSRs I've ever worked with personally. They are always on top of the ball when it comes to anything service-wise. So again, kind of just easing that client into knowing that, you know what, you are choosing the right broker when it comes to your insurance needs, and whatever those insurance needs are, we can definitely find a solution for you.
Yeah. And one of the things that I love about kind of being the educator, but almost in the back of your mind, knowing that, like, you know, you can't always help everybody, right? And what I mean by that is somebody calls in and they are 100% price-based, where they shop every single year. And, you know, even that first interaction is, hey, my name is so-and-so. I want to get a price of my auto insurance. And we've been there before, right? It's very quick. It's very to the point. You're going to get maybe 5 or 6 more questions before it turns into just give me the price. And you almost kind of know, okay, where is this going? What's the actual reasoning? Is there maybe something behind the scenes that's, you know, purposely being non-disclosed or trying to get past the elements? And maybe that's not the right experience for both parties, right? So you can get a policy in place, but then when something happens, is it going to turn into hey, we didn't do enough time because you didn't allow it, all the way to, you know, you purposely led me astray, right? And I'm sure stuff like that unfortunately does happen in the business, in our industry, for sure.
It happens in every business.
Yeah, I mean, it happens, right? There's always going to be, I think, people that fit into that box. But I would say personally, the point of it is to establish a little bit more than that. And then at that point, if it's, hey, Mike, I only got another 10 or 15 more minutes, you know, how fast can we get this done? I'll be as transparent as possible and say, yeah, I totally agree. I'll do whatever I can the next 10, 15 minutes for you. And then if there are further things, you know, we'll link up in another phone call, or I can send off an email to you if you're a busy person. Because I get it. There's a lot of people that are super, super busy and want to establish that relationship, James, without spending, you know, half an hour to an hour. They physically don't have it. And I get that as well.
Yeah. Convenience is always going to be something that people are going to pay more for. And that's why a lot of these online companies have done very well in the last few years, is because, don't get me wrong, it's really convenient. I don't have to talk to anyone. I can just go online, I can put in my information, and there you go. There's my quote. The problem with that is that if you input anything wrong, then that quote is basically void. Like, it's not going to be a accurate quote whatsoever. On top of that, too, as a broker, we have reports that we go off of, especially for auto insurance. So online, you can't pull those reports yourself, so you have no idea. You're just guessing realistically. So until those reports are actually pulled and we can see what's actually going on those reports, as a client, if you're doing that stuff online, if you don't know the exact dates for like licensing, exact dates for when you actually first got insurance, exact dates for if you have tickets or accidents, that could definitely sway how a quote comes back to us.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great talking point, because there's been, in the last 5 years, I would say, it could be longer, but it is what it is. In the last 5 years, I would say there's been a massive shift in kind of the general public to do things as quick as possible, right? Everyone's time is valuable. We want to respect that. And I fully appreciate that mindset as well. The one thing that I will say, from being in this space for as long as I have been now and seeing those kind of online or digital things come to fruition, is that if you want to put everything in online, James, like you were saying, and the idea is to get a policy and then never chat to someone again, there's going to be pros and cons to that type of experience, right? And I don't think the average person necessarily gets that. It's almost like, well, if I put this all in, how is this not right? But there's so much more into an insurance policy that we kind of look at as brokers on your behalf. That's literally the reason why we do what we do, is to kind of be that middleman and say, hey, I know you've had insurance for the last 20, 25 years, but it has been off and on a little bit. There's been some of those gaps, right? That claim that you thought was not your fault actually was your fault a few years back.
Oh, how many people do you get like that? Like I had one recently where they're like, oh, I had a parking ticket, Polar reports, speeding ticket. And they don't even know they even have a ticket, right? So that's why it's nice to have someone like us that knows those reports, because imagine that person going online, doing a quote, not knowing they have a speeding ticket. They put parking ticket instead. So because parking tickets don't impact your insurance, they bind coverage with someone. And then after the fact, the company then finds out it's a speeding ticket. They change that. And then the quote goes up because it's a rateable ticket at that point, right?
Right. And see, in my opinion, that type of service where it's like that kind of that back end underwriting, I actually find that it's done a massive disservice to our industry, mainly for the fact that if a client says it's all good and the policy's on the books, if it is all good and they get that rate, they're all happy. But if it ends up being that there was something that was, unknown to them or non-disclosed, and us as kind of those professionals are not doing our due diligence, I would call it, up front, what it does is it puts this net over the entire industry, saying like all people in insurance, are doing things just for the sale. And it kind of has that negative connotation going around to us as professionals, right? So we're all working the same way, I guess, is what the client experience sounds like.
Yeah, so let's kind of roll back and kind of go back to like when you're first starting. Let's say you quote the business, everything looks good, and the client wants to bind. What's some information that you basically ask from the client to basically move forward on a bind? Yeah.
And this is something I put together. I've done this more recently in the last couple of years to kind of expedite that process, but also be fully transparent. So after, somebody says, yeah, Mike, let's go ahead. Everything looks good. I'll typically verbally over the phone mention about a few things that are needed, like requirement wise, that insurance companies have, but I'll also send them an email as a follow-up after that phone call to say, hey guys, thanks for so much for trusting me. These are the things that I'll need to get that application ready for you. So, people that have been through this experience know, but for auto insurance, for example, you're typically looking at things like ownerships, bill of sale for the vehicle. You're looking at, if you have younger drivers, probably like a driver's history report, even photos, James, if you have older vehicles or modified vehicles. We did a segment on that in a previous episode. But all of these things, I try to get a list to them, knowing what's going to be required, because there is nothing worse than saying, okay, I'm ready to proceed. And then somebody coming back to you a week after saying, I need this, this, this. And then, another follow-up email. I need this, 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 right? It's almost like you don't know what to expect at that point.
Yeah, if you can break it down in one email and exactly what you have in black and white ink, then it's obviously easier for the client to read that and go, okay, I need this. I need a driver's license. I need a start date of the policy. I can pick when my withdrawal date's going to be, so I can send them that. Ownership, if it's a vehicle, I find a lot of people miss the like lien holder and lesser part of that, and the mortgage.
Yes.
Do you find that too? They kind of just like almost like look over that because maybe like the lingo. I don't know if like the verbiage that we use just kind of throws them off, but I find a lot of people miss like mortgage, and then if there's if they're paying off their car, the financial company that the car is with.
Yeah. There, you know what? There's a massive disconnect there, and I don't know if it's because when you're financing, there's this understanding that at the end of it you own it, so people just say I'm paying for it, but I actually own the vehicle, so they don't think they're financing it in a sense. I've heard of that before. I actually find that people that lease vehicles know that it's leased, and they actually say like, I need to add on, this lesser, for example.
Yeah,
It gets
I
more.
find the lesser is easier because they know that they don't own the vehicle. I'm just leasing this. and this is who it's leased through. But I find if you're financing it, like I said, I think you're correct, is where people think that they actually own the vehicle, but they're making payments on it. So technically they don't own it yet.
Right. Well, and the thing is, they actually do own it, but you own it after making payments for 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it might be.
Exactly.
So yeah, if that answers the question, I always send off an email afterwards, and the goal is to hopefully send as much information as possible in hopefully the quickest time too, right? So if your policy renews a month from now, getting as much of that as possible early off, because when you send that to the insurance company, James, which might be a good segue or talking point, it gives the insurance company more time as well to kind of actually release that policy and get a payment schedule for the clients.
Yeah, before we get into that, I kind of want to bring up one extra thing that I find I get a lot too is when we're doing the documents and everything and processing the documents, is it a common thing to see that there is still a signing portion of the documents? Because I've worked at other places and I've gotten this question a lot, and they're like, "Oh, it's 2023. Like, why do we need to sign documents? Like, is there do you have an opinion on why documents are still signed?" Because I personally agree we should continue to do that, because I think it just personally, it obviously covers us and it shows the client transparency of what they're actually purchasing, right? Where if you're not doing that, then there's no review for accuracy. There's no review for what they actually are possibly purchasing, right? So with those documents, they at least can, again, how many people probably just skim through and don't look at it, but at least they're signing and saying, you know what, I'm aware of this is of what I'm actually getting, right? So
yeah,
personally, I do like the signing portion of it, because like I said, it covers us and it gives, I feel if you're actually reading the documents, it gives the client more transparency of what they're actually purchasing.
Well, yeah, there's online. I know some places that I've heard that I've done gone to the verbal thing over the phone where it's all recorded, saying I want to proceed with stuff. Some of the larger agencies, I think, have adapted that model. But I mean, just actual written or e-signed signatures, I mean, it's still a legally binding contract, right? I mean, I don't think that's ever going to go away, just with respect to the fact that it can't be. And that would lead to so much, it would lead to so much fraud, right? And so much misrepresentation. And I mean, you're opening a can of worms at that point.
Yeah. If I worked for a company actually that the actual go ahead, the legal binding of the contract was when they sent us the banking information. So we didn't have any, realistically, all we had was emails. But once we got banking information, that was basically go ahead, because there was no signed contracts, nothing. It was,
oh my God, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it was, I didn't really understand it, but I was like, you know what? Sure, if that's how it is. And again, that's how we proceeded with all of our deals, was once we got banking information, and once the client, and then another thing was too, is that the client got documents and they opened those documents. Again, that was another form of they're basically approving the policy moving forward.
Wow. I can see so much from a liability perspective there for someone to be like, hey, you send me a quote. I don't necessarily, I haven't agreed to anything.
Yeah, I can see that, but I can also see the fact of, if you've sent banking details, there's responsibility on your end as well. You've sent the banking details, yeah, but you know what though? Even in that experience right now, if someone sends us a void check but then gets an alternative quote somewhere, which they have it, there has to be a hard stop somewhere, or else everybody could say, "Oh, I sent you the banking, but I was still looking for quotes." And then what's your, what would be, there would be no workaround at that point. It would basically be like, "Oh, sorry, you've agreed." And I don't think in a court of law, I don't think that would ever stand up. Yeah, I don't know. I think as a client, if I'm sending my banking details, I want to move forward. It's if I go to the store, I'm not standing in line to buy something when I'm not buying anything. I don't have my credit card or debit card out ready to use it if I'm not actually going to use it. That doesn't make sense to me personally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I get your point. I've seen, in my experience, I've had so many people that have sent me all the stuff to even get an application ready, and then the day later,
It's like, hey, I got some more quotes online. I'm going elsewhere.
That's different, though. That's
like,
that's completely different. Where the client now has come back and said, you know what, I'm going to move. I'm going to go elsewhere. That's different, right? But if you send the banking details, and there's no communication after that, and then basically the policy gets signed, and then you come back and be like, oh, I never wanted to move forward with this. It's like, well, you kind of sent me everything and like approved everything, and then now you don't want to, right? Again, if they come back and say, oh, I went elsewhere, okay, well, that's a little bit different. Then I cancel everything, we move on, right?
Yeah, wow. That's still mind blowing. That's crazy. That's even a thing.
Yeah, like I said, to me, I still got documentation stuff when I needed to, especially because I was doing a lot of commercial stuff. So I was still getting things signed just to kind of cover my end. But yeah, it was crazy times.
Yeah. But yeah, from start to finish, one of the things too, is a good talking point as part of how that experience works for us is when a policy is in place. I know one of the common questions is, send over that payment schedule. I need to know what I'm going to be paying, right? Which is what everyone's, I shouldn't say that, but one of the very, very, very large questions that comes up every single most conversations is, what am I going to get that payment schedule? What am I looking at? So I'll typically, personally, when a policy does come in, once it's been issued by the insurance company, I'll always set a reminder to send them over that payment schedule too, ahead, as soon as possible. So they know, this is the first one, this is the one that covers if it is, for example, a first and last scenario, they know what to expect. If it's maybe three installments, which from time to time does happen with some of the companies.
Yeah, not very often. It just depends on how quick they process their documents. But again,
yeah,
making your client aware of that is obviously because basically we get the documents as the company basically processes them. So once the company processes them, they have to send them out to mail. And mail, we all know, takes 2 to 3 weeks to get. So once we get them, we can send them or email them to our clients so they have them instantly. But then again, they'll get another copy in the mail, depending, again, and this is all depending on the company, because now some companies have gone paperless. So some companies, unless you physically ask for documents to be mailed, they won't send them anymore. But once that policy is actually processed on the company side, we basically get the documents and then we can send them directly to the client instantly once we actually get them.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be something that differentiates between brokerages, because a lot of the way that you kind of do a full circle experience for the client is what are you providing after that sale, James, is done? So from a sales rep perspective, once you sign those policy documents, are there further steps you've taken to kind of make it a full circle experience and say, okay, this is now what to expect. This will take this long, or this is what you're going to see in a few months, or this is how you can get a hold of me directly. It's all of these things that make the client experience more memorable and add more value, which hopefully creates that experience where, you're going to have them for quite some time. If you add nothing to the experience, can you blame them for wanting to go online or to another person the very next year, right? Of
course not. If you don't add value to their experience, again, insurance is such a dry subject. There's no actual physical thing I can give you. It's not like when you buy a car and I can touch the steering wheel and drive it. Insurance is just the promise of basically protecting you if you ever need to use that protection. So I think that's always the biggest hurdle that we have, is obviously showing what value we bring to the table. But again, if you don't bring value to the table, why as a consumer would I stay with that person if there's no actual value being brought, right?
Right. And this is one of the things, is that part of our landscape has shifted a little bit because of consumer demands, where we as end clients want things done right away. And I'm speaking as one myself in other aspects, right? But if we're doing things every single day as quick as possible, then we want our home or auto insurance to be done in a similar manner.
100%. I don't want to be waiting for stuff. I want things off my plate and done so I don't have to worry about them anymore, right? So if I'm dealing with an insurance broker that is taking a week to just send me documents to sign, do I really, I can just go online and do it myself instantly, right? So yeah, that's what I mean. If you don't bring value, then there's like you can't really say anything when people want to leave you because there's no value proposition to that whatsoever.
Yeah, so basically that was kind of the start to finish for myself there, is once you get it signed, once you do that, what are the next steps too? And I find there's a few other things that we can very briefly touch base on that I love to do personally, which is, if a client gives me a call on something even after a billing related inquiry or maybe a coverage change or a vehicle question, I personally want to be there for those conversations. And then if I have to send it off on the back end team to make those changes, you still kind of get that client facing experience where we're looking after our clients. And a lot of broker models have shifted a little bit that way too, James, where it's, each person has their designated lane to stay in.
Yeah. I want to touch base on this and then I kind of want to roll back to another topic, but I feel like the broker kind of relationship with the client is so important because I cannot stand when people sell you something and then they disappear. I tell my clients that all the time. Like, I'm not going to basically sell you a policy and then you'll never hear from me again. Like, that's just not who I am personally. I'm going to make sure that I follow up, and if you need me, I'm going to be there for you. Yes, it might not be me physically actually doing those changes. Like if you're getting a new car, yes, I'll take all the information. I'll send it off to our back team to actually do it because, again, like I don't do those very often, right? But I'm still there. It's not like I'm taking the phone call and saying, hey, John, oh, you got a new car? Well, great. Becky's going to talk to you and do the change. I don't do that. It's just, I don't know. I just find that that's a really bad way to build a relationship in my personal view.
Yeah. And part of that is just transparency, right? There's a part of that where maybe the model for the specific company you're with is to do the sale and then kind of move off and then never hear from them. Transparency to what that experience looks like, I think, is important to the clients, because if I sell you a policy, but I'm never going to chat with you again and you go to someone else, and it's kind of almost been done as a way of like, not to undermine, but almost just to say, this is how we do it, but it's not really fully explained. You haven't given them the opportunity to say, well, I would like to deal with you. Saying so-and-so is going to deal with you and don't worry, they're competent, is totally fine. But if that's not what the person was looking for, it's almost like you led them astray in a sense.
Yeah, basically.
Right. And I know that, again, the way that every business model works, everyone's going to have their own way of wanting to kind of deal with business. This is why it's so important, I think, as a client too, to know kind of what value you want to see from someone. So if you want to deal with that one person, it's super important to bring that up. Or if it's price-based, bring that up, or whatever the concerns might be from your last experience. Almost having a chance to hone in, say, what did you like or not like about where your insurance was last, and how can I create a plan around that moving forward? Before
I roll back to the point I want to make, I think that is super important because at the end of the day, like I know if my client calls, texts, emails me, I can instantly go, oh, you know what? That person lives here. That person drives this vehicle. That person owns this business, and this is what they do, right? For me, like I'm just very in touch with who my clients are, and I can be like, oh, like I might not have talked to them all year, but you know what? I know exactly who this person is, right? So I think it's kind of staying in touch with who your clients actually are. And again, I think people will enjoy that. If you're just a policy number to a broker or an agent, like why do I want to stick with that person, right? There's no personal connection there. If I'm just policy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 when I call in, like I can go anywhere and be policy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So
right,
I think the personal connection is definitely something that people really, really like. And again, everyone's different, so some people might not like that. I mean, you know what? They just want to be to the point, and those clients might not be a perfect fit for every broker, right? But if you are looking for more of a personal touch, and again, you call and I know exactly who you are, where you live, how your family's doing, then you know what? That's probably someone that I want to have for a long-term period of time because that's just how I operate. But
yeah, and you know what's actually a spot I just wanted to quickly say that I've actually seen is that we always go through shifts, right? There's always cycles in insurance as well. The harder markets, softer client interactions, what's valued. And there was a period in time where I think that the average person loved everything being done online. It was like, oh, digital is amazing. I can go online. I can never chat with someone. I can be from my home office and get it all done. And then, this whole experience is quicker. It doesn't take much time. So there was like a massive value from the time perspective. And what I've seen personally is a lot of people coming back through that cycle being like, hey, I've been with that kind of experience for the last 5 years, but I want to make sure that I can still have that value proposition from someone that takes a little bit more time, but it's someone that's been in the business for a while, understands what my values are. It's kind of going back to what I hope is more of that broker channel too, James. And it's not just about can I get an auto insurance policy in 5 minutes sort of mentality, but it takes cycles to understand that, because you almost have to go through it, right? I know we've mentioned before, but until you actually go through a claims experience, whether it's home or auto, it really doesn't matter. If you've been through a claims experience and it hasn't been what you thought, or maybe you didn't get the knowledge or the insight or the service you thought was going to happen a certain way, that's when you actually see, holy smokes, man, like this is what I actually valued. I didn't have that. Or, you know what I mean? Like you almost learn through experience.
Yeah, I think we've turned back the clock a little bit because, again, people years ago obviously came into the office, shook your hand, signed everything in person. Then we kind of had that digital transformation where everything was done online. You didn't talk to anyone. But I think now we have more of like a hybrid system where people don't come in to the office, but you still talk to people on the phone and might get signatures online, but It's not fully done online anymore. So I think we went from the really in-person to the really online, and then we kind of have settled in that middle part where there's still stuff done over the phone. We still talk to our clients, but at the end of the day, signatures are still done online. Most of the documents are sent online now. So it's kind of like a hybrid kind of little transition we've gone into nowadays. Or at least how we operate, or how I operate at least. I know, Mike, I think you operate
a lot of the same. I think a lot of the same. I think you're going to see there's always transitions, but there's still going to be a lot of client-facing experiences where you want that brick and mortar, where it's like, I want to go and have coffee with my guy I've had for the last 35 years, right? And there is a segment of population that still very much values that. But there's also the next kind of generation of consumers coming up saying, I want to buy it as quick as possible, but also with a little bit of that person I trust, right? So everyone's doing their business, working many hours to work on whatever they do. So they want to outsource those other things, right? And having someone that you trust to say, hey, Mike, look after this next home I'm purchasing, and I just trust what I need for it, right? Like, don't make sure it's not undervalued and things of that nature. Like you said, James, that's perfect. It's the hybrid model. And I think we've settled in that in a good spot. And then there's always going to be, quirks and things to work out along the way. Obviously, cycles change, but it's saved a little bit more time on both the salespeople in our position as well as the client's position. So I like where it's at right now.
One point I kind of want to roll back to, which I think we talked about before we started recording, was the whole idea of what it means when we say binding authority. So do you want to kind of explain that a little bit? Because I think people get misconcepted that we are brokers that work for 10, 15, 20 companies, and we just have access to every part of the business, where couldn't be the more wrong statement. It's, we represent those companies, yes, but we actually don't do all the background stuff. Like when it comes to processing documents, that's why it takes time to kind of process that stuff, is because we do it on our end. And then once it basically needs to go to the actual insurance company, it goes to them, and then they take time to process it, which again, every company is different. Some companies are really quick, and some companies we know, Mike, are super slow. So do you kind of want to explain like what we actually mean by binding authority?
Well, I mean, there's kind of two parts to that. When, as insurance brokers, what that really just means is that if we have binding authority, it means we're able to actually start or initiate a policy on a client's behalf, obviously with their approval and with their signatures and everything. But it's the company's way of saying, we've given you authority to do that. It doesn't have to come from us as the broker to the insurance company and get approval from them before we can start. So there are parameters in place, but we have authority to put certain types of policies that with certain risks in place once we've done all of our due diligence. So that's really what it comes down to. Obviously, as more of a kind of disclaimer, there are lots of situations where we don't have binding authority. Maybe it's a high valued home. Maybe it requires underwriting approval from the provider for, it could be X number of reasons, James. But if you fall into that bucket where it's something the insurance company wants, it's quite possible we can just do the insurance for you within, that minute or that hour, that day, whatever it might be, and start or initiate that policy on the insurance company's behalf.
Yeah, it's basically just fast tracking, so we don't have to go to the insurance company, get approval from them, go back to the client, get approval from them. And it's just a lot of waiting time. I mentioned before, there's some companies that are super quick. Like you can send off the documents and they process them within days. There's other companies, unfortunately, that are like 2 to 3 weeks. So imagine as a client, having to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get insurance coverage because we all need approval from the insurance company. That'd be insane. There's no value to that whatsoever. So that's why as brokers, we have that binding authority where for more generalized policies, we can basically just say, here's your coverage, here's your policy. And then basically at the back end, they process it. And then once they process it, they'll send you all the documents and everything like that. So I said, I think it's just a fast track to make sure that we're not spending useless time waiting for documents to be processed, because no one hates processing times more than I do. I cannot stand how in the day that we live in, how things take that long. And I understand there's obviously like challenges with the workforce and kind of how that's kind of all panning out, which can be a whole other episode, but I'm not going to get into it. But I cannot stand when when companies go, oh, this is going to take 2 weeks to process. And I'm like, why? It's 2023. This should not take 2 weeks to process. So there's no one more advocating for things to take less time than me, because I cannot stand when things take a super long period of time. Because I don't personally, there's no excuse to why those things take more than maybe 2 business days.
Yeah. It's, you know what it is? There's 2 aspects. It's the red tape from behind the scenes about things that need to be done from the insurance company's perspective. And then there's also just the fact that there's only things within our power that we can control, right? So that's the reality of it, right? That not everything we can control. I would love it, James, if we as an industry, things were a lot more condensed, right? Where the transaction process, as much as I still want to take my time to get through to what's important to the client and then represent that to the insurance company the best way possible, I would love for the clients to kind of, or the insurance companies, I apologize, to on the back end, just have things where if everything comes to them the way they want and it's a client they want and we kind of met those requirements, it should be quicker. I fully agree with you. And that goes back to, all the stuff with COVID and labor shortages and finding the right people and changing technology and all of that, which is, that's definitely not for today. But yeah, it should be quicker. It's important to know as a client, there is stuff on the back end that has to be done, like lots of things, right? That's the same as mortgages and the legal side from a home closing and even the real estate agent, right? We all fall into very similar categories with what paperwork needs to be filed. Yeah.
And there's, like I said, there are processes behind it, but I wish those processes were just a little bit more fast tracked through. And again, something that should be taking maybe 2 days to look at sometimes takes 2 weeks. And I'm just shaking my head. I'm just like, why? Like, what is going on here? What is going on?
Well, you know what, too? We've chatted about this with our mortgage people, but what would be amazing to see as well, and this is kind of more of that collaboration, right, between a client on a home transaction, just being led down the right path from start to finish too, and having those relationships with people in our business so that that whole client experience is a little bit more sound. Because we've chatted about this before, how it's not always the quickest or easiest experience when closing a home.
And that's why I make those connections with dealerships and lawyers and real estate and mortgages, because I like to fast track. If I can offer an industry outside of what I do and offer a client a referral to someone else, I feel like that's just such a better way of doing business. Because, you would be shocked of how many times that, like, for example, if someone's buying a new car, I, as the broker, will go through all the hoops and obstacles to call the dealership, get bill of sale, financing details. And you know how many times I get from the dealership that's selling the client the car, why are you doing this? It's like, but this is your job to send it. Or I love this one, Mike. I love this one. I call the dealership, I try to get the bill of sale, and the dealer goes, well, I've already sent it to the client. Why don't you ask them for it? It's like, I'm trying to give a better experience to the client other than just sitting back and making them do everything, when I can easily call or send an email to get that information from you guys. Like, that's your job to present that information if I'm asking for it. And there's some times where I get from the dealership, I'm like, you guys literally want this car off your lot as soon as possible without having to do anything for it. It's like, that's not the kind of value that I see as a consumer. Like, if I had a dealership that told me that and I was buying a car for them, I would turn around and be like, no, I'm not buying from you. Because if you can't lift up your finger and click a send button on your email to send to my insurance broker for the information that he needs or she needs, like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And like I said, you'd be surprised of how many people I talk to that they're like, oh, well, I already sent it to the client, so just ask them for it. And it's like, no, that's not how I conduct business. I want to make sure I take off all the stress possible from my client, because, again, buying a car is stressful. Buying a home is stressful. So if I can take even a percentage of stress off their shoulders during that buying process, then you know what? At the end of the day, they'll be like, you know what? Wow, like James or Mike really helped me and made this as stress-free as possible. Because, again, as a consumer, why am I going to change who I conduct business with if it's going to be a stressful process? It doesn't make sense.
Right. And you know what? You make a good point there, because in my experience too, and this is not a dig at all dealerships, because it's certainly not the case.
It's not all dealerships, but it is a select few. And again, every industry is going to have the bad apples in it. But unfortunately, I've just seen it too often where dealerships just sell the car, and once the car is signed and delivered, they don't want to do anything else with that client. They want it off their desk in the filing cabinet and done. And it's like, I don't conduct business that way. So I just don't understand how people can do it that way.
Right. And you know what? I didn't even think about this, but this is a good topic to bring up about some of the things that we can do we do on the broker side, or what I try to do is, when a client either is buying a vehicle or buying a new house, for example, I'll try to go out of my way to find out what maybe the mortgage agent or the lawyer is, or the dealer, for example, James, and say, instead of saying, hey guys, go back to them and get me this info, I'll say, let me do this for you. You're buying it at so-and-so dealership. Do you know the finance person's name, or who's your sales rep? And I can quickly email them and ask them for the stuff that we would need on the insurance, right? On the insurance requirements. So the same thing with a lawyer on a home closing. Hey guys, I know this is closing in, 2 weeks. Do we have the mortgage details yet? Or even go to that. So instead of saying, hey, give me the mortgage details to the client from the lawyer, for example, it's, what's their contact name at XYZ law firm?
That's adding value, though. You're adding value to that experience. But you know how many times that I get from a mortgage agent or like a lawyer that goes, oh, this isn't closing for another week, so I'll send it to you the day before. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, you're giving me literally zero time to even process it for the client. And then it makes us look bad as the insurance broker, because then the insurance, once it gets to this stage where insurance is holding up the deal, I find the lawyers and mortgage people have no problem throwing us under the bus, even though we've asked for it. Mike, there's been so many times where I've emailed for a home closing, like 2 or 3 weeks before the home closes, and the lawyer won't get back to me until maybe like a day or two before it closes. And it's
you know what though? There's a part of that is on the mortgage people because they send over instructions to the lawyers like way too late.
Oh, yeah. There needs to be more time because, again, there's nothing I hate more than it being our fault. And it's like, it's not our fault. I followed up with it 2 or 3 weeks prior, and you send it to me 2 or 3 days before the home closed. So, like, who's to blame for this, right?
Right.
So just having better time. But again, taking that stress off the client, right? Like, you're adding value, as you were saying, to the experience where you're reaching out yourself to get that information without having to go back to the client and be like, oh, sorry, John, you have to go do all this. And then you can send it all to me and then I'll actually do the insurance for you, right? I don't conduct my business that way.
Yeah. No, that's very fair points and things that we've come across in our experiences for sure. I've come across those for sure.
But yeah, kind of wrapping up, is there anything you kind of want to summarize or anything you kind of want to go over before we kind of wrap the episode up?
I mean, I would just say for everyone that is looking to get alternative options on their insurance, for example, kind of think about what you value as well, because it'll give you a better idea about who the right fit is. Because at the end of the day, James, you said it earlier, we're selling basically in the sense, there's no tangible product. We're selling a promise of trust that we will be there for you if something happens to that vehicle or to that car, or to that home, whatever the things are we're insuring. So it's really important to make sure that if you are someone that wants to establish that relationship, make sure you've done your due diligence and kind of reaching out to different people if that's the case, but just finding out what you value in someone, maybe how long they've been in business. There's questions you can ask, right? Like any other thing. I don't think it should just be go online and find the cheapest quote and say yes, because there's so many elements to insurance that you might not be aware of. And we have these conversations every day. So find out what your value is, whether it's service or price or what's the most important pain point, you could say, and then go with there on finding the right people. And hopefully I'm the right person for that. And we're the right people for that, James, is the plug.
And I was literally about to just kind of bring that up. Definitely find out what your kind of touch points are and what you're really looking for. Because realistically, like, to keep this very real, every broker, and me and Mike included, we might not be the right fit for you. And it's just the reality. That's why there's so many real estate agents and mortgage brokers and insurance brokers. Everyone has their different way of conducting business, their different characteristics, like just who they are as people, right? So you know what? Me and Mike just might not be the right fit. It's not, we can't, if me and Mike could service every single person we talk to, there would be no other insurance brokers in Ontario, because why would you need to deal with anyone else, right? So I think from what Mike was saying, obviously find what your touch points are, what your value propositions you're looking for in an insurance broker, but obviously finding someone that you work well with, because at the end of the day, if you can't work well with someone, why are you going to conduct business with them?
Yeah. and that's the big thing about buying insurance is that everyone needs it. So it's the necessary evil that we've talked about, but there's still ways to buy the right policy for yourself. And I'll leave off with that.
Exactly. But again, thank you guys for tuning in. We post episodes every Tuesday at 12 p.m. So it's a weekly kind of schedule that we have. So if you guys haven't checked it out, please go follow, like, share, comment, subscribe, whatever kind of service you guys are on. We're basically on everything: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube even. So like I said, make sure if you guys not to miss an episode, we post every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you guys are following or subscribed, you guys will not miss an episode. So, but again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll check you guys next week.